Welcome back to the deep dive. I want you to run a quick thought experiment with me. It's almost a little shocking when you really think about it.
Okay, I'm ready.
Imagine achieving something, just monumental. You've just clinched a Nobel Prize, or maybe you've been appointed to the highest court in the land,
So the peak of your field.
the absolute peak. Or maybe, like Maya Angelou, you've written a whole library of essential life-changing books. Your success is, it's not just evident, it's internationally verified. You are, by every objective measure, an expert.
The world sees you as undeniably competent.
Exactly. Now, here's the twist. I want you to imagine walking into that place of ultimate achievement, your lab, your office, your stage, and feeling this deep, persistent internal anxiety, a voice that whispers, not loudly, but just constantly, I am a fraud.
I don't belong here.
Yes, I got here purely by accident, by some kind of luck, or by fooling the right people. And they're going to find me out any minute now.
And that feeling, that gnawing internal conviction that you're an intellectual phony, even with all this overwhelming external proof of your success, that is the core of what we're unpacking today.
The imposter phenomenon.
Exactly. Or IP. It's like the secret tax that high achievement demands from you.
It really is. It's the unspoken rule of high performance we're talking about today. If you're successful enough, you will, at some point, probably feel like a fraud.
So our mission is to give you a really thorough understanding of this psychological pattern.
Right, but not as a personal flaw. That's the key. We see it as a sophisticated signal, and we want to give you the concrete tools to manage its effects.
And let's frame this correctly right from the start. This is a pattern in experience. It's a phenomenon that was first described way back in the late 1970s by two researchers, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes.
Oh.
But, and this is crucial, it is explicitly not a clinical diagnosis. It's not a mental disorder you'd find in, the standard diagnostic manuals. It's a common psychological response to success.
If it's not a disorder, why does it feel so profoundly universal? I mean, the statistics we looked at suggest this isn't some niche anxiety.
Well, it feels universal because for high achievers, it's pretty much the norm. Studies consistently find that upwards of 70% of people will report experiencing it at some point.
70%? That's huge.
It is. And if you narrow that focus to, say, leaders, to C-suite executives, people operating at the highest levels,
Yeah.
well, professional coaches would argue that number is much closer to 100%.
Wow. So if you haven't felt it yet,
You might just not be aiming high enough. It's a strange thought, isn't it?
that is a staggering realization, that the people running the world are often the ones most convinced they're about to be exposed.
And we have proof of that.
Speaking of which, the quotes from what we're calling the Celebrity Imposter Club are they're genuinely shocking because they totally strip away that facade of confidence.
It's the ultimate proof of concept. I mean, take Albert Einstein, the man who literally redefined our understanding of the universe. He admitted that the exaggerated esteem his life's work received made him feel very ill at ease. And he said it compelled him to think of himself as an involuntary swindler.
An involuntary swindler. I mean, think about that. The father of relativity using the language of a con man.
It just forces you to confront the fact that success is a terrible cure for self-doubt. You can win the Nobel Prize, but that internal critic, it still gets a vote.
Absolutely. And the anxiety just persists across every field, every generation. Look at Maya Angelou. She wrote 11 profound books. She changed the entire literary landscape.
A giant.
And she confessed that she consistently worried, and I'm quoting here, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody, and they're going to find me out.
That fear of exposure, that's the drumbeat.
It's the persistent, agonizing drumbeat of IP. Tom Hanks, a two-time Oscar winner, he said it perfectly. He asked, when are they going to discover that I am, in fact, a fraud and take everything away from me?
The idea that it's all just an illusion that could shatter at any moment.
And your secret inadequacy will finally be revealed?
And Michelle Obama, she added such a crucial piece to this. She shared her experience specifically because she felt it was vital for everyone to hear that common feeling of doubt.
She said she had a little imposter syndrome.
Yeah, and she emphasized that everyone, even people with tremendous power and influence, shares those internal questions about whether they're worthy, whether they're capable.
So we have this ultimate paradox. The more objectively successful you become, the louder that internal critic screams about you not being worthy.
It confirms what the actress Lupita Nyong'o found. She said winning an Oscar actually made her imposter syndrome worse
Worse. How?
because the pressure just escalated to this impossible level.
Yeah.
She was thinking, now I've achieved this. What am I going to do next? What do I even strive for?
Wow.
So what's central here is the gap. The feeling isn't necessarily about a lack of skill. It's about the perceived, this terrifying mismatch between the intense internal feeling of incompetence and the irrefutable external proof of success.
And navigating that gap, that's the whole game.
That's the definition of the syndrome. And that brings us to how this inner feeling starts to manifest in our daily actions.
Okay, so we've established this feeling is basically universal among the elite. Now let's get tactical. How does this internal fear actually show up in our day-to-day actions?
Right.
If the core of imposter syndrome is failing to truly internalize your accomplishments, how does that translate into, self-sabotage?
Well, the failure to internalize is the absolute key. It's a mechanism of cognitive distortion where the person just cannot accept the objective data of their own success.
They just reject the evidence.
They do. And the source material outlines several key behaviors that show this pattern. The first, and maybe the most defining one, is attribution error.
Meaning?
The person attributes their success exclusively to external factors. They completely ignore their own skills, their own competence. They'll rationalize a huge win by saying it was purely luck or good fortune, or that the timing was perfect.
Or they'll say they only succeeded because they, figured out what their professor wanted to hear.
Exactly. They find a way to give the credit to anything but themselves.
But hold on, isn't some of that just, cultural modesty? You're not supposed to brag.
That's a really critical distinction.
Yeah.
Modesty lets you accept praise internally while maybe downplaying it externally. IP is a deeply ingrained refusal to accept the factual evidence of your capability, even when you're alone.
I see.
You truly, deeply believe the praise is misplaced. And this shows up as actively overlooking or just rejecting positive feedback. It's a denial of ability, which is so damaging over time because it just starves your ego of necessary positive reinforcement.
And if you can't internalize success, you must feel like you constantly have to reprove it. How does that affect goal setting?
It leads to what seems like the most counterproductive behavior imaginable. You start setting extremely challenging, often completely unattainable goals for yourself.
Why?
They set up these impossible hurdles, not because they're just ambitious, but because they're trying to prove to themselves and everyone else that they aren't imposters. The goal becomes a defense mechanism.
So the goal isn't about achievement. It's about avoiding being found out.
Precisely. And the devastating part of this cycle is that when they inevitably fall short of that perfect, impossible standard, and for someone with severe IP, a 99% success is a failure,
Right.
they immediately seize on that shortfall as proof of their inadequacy. It's a vicious, self-fulfilling prophecy that just amplifies the core fear of being exposed.
And that cycle leads directly to two very different but equally destructive behaviors. We should really look at those two extremes.
Yes, the extremes are crucial because they show that the same internal fear can produce opposite external actions. The first is what we call the over-preparation path.
Okay.
This person is driven by an overwhelming, almost panicked need to prove they belong. They need to avoid any hint of failure that might reveal their secret.
So the effort itself is the shield. They believe if they just work hard enough, they can outrun the feeling of being a fraud.
That is a perfect way to put it. We saw this one academic who described how his imposter feelings lit a fire under me, forcing him into this intense workaholism just to maintain the illusion of being worthy.
They just overwork, overprepare, check, and double-check everything.
To the point of exhaustion and burnout. The goal is to make failure impossible through sheer brute force effort.
But your body and mind can only sustain that for so long before burnout is, inevitable. What about the other extreme, the procrastination path?
So the second path is the procrastination path, and this is driven by the exact opposite mechanism. A crippling fear that any attempt will result in a mistake, which will then definitively reveal them as a fraud.
So why even start the big project if the risk of exposure is so high?
Exactly. We saw an example of an accomplished executive who would delay starting high-stakes projects, not out of laziness, but because of this paralyzing concern that even one tiny, understandable mistake would be used as the ultimate proof that she was the fraud she believed herself to be.
So they wait until the last minute.
Fearing that their performance can't possibly meet the impossible standards they've set. And the irony is that the rush caused by procrastinating often causes the very errors they were trying to avoid, which just reinforces the whole cycle.
That makes the anxiety just feed on itself. And then you have the swing between the two, which is what Tina Fey describes so perfectly.
Her description is brilliant because it highlights the sheer mental energy it takes to navigate these swings. She talked about oscillating between moments of extreme egomania, where she's riding this wave of confidence and productivity.
And then suddenly,
Suddenly she feels, I'm a fraud. Oh God, they're on to me. She said her strategy was just to try to enjoy the egomania when it came and then slide through the idea of fraud when the doubt inevitably came back.
so whether you burn yourself out by overworking or you freeze up by procrastinating, the driver underneath is exactly the same.
It's the same corrosive, paralyzing fear of being seen as less capable than your role demands.
Understanding the symptoms is one thing, but Dr. Valerie Young gave us this incredible tool by breaking down the imposter phenomenon into 5 distinct archetypes, or personas.
Yeah, this is so helpful because recognizing the specific face the syndrome is showing you, that's the first real practical step toward disempowering that inner critic.
It lets us stop treating IP as this one giant amorphous anxiety blob and start breaking it down into specific critiques we can actually manage. So which persona is first?
We begin with the perfectionist. This one is defined by their impossibly high standards. Their core belief is essentially, I must be flawless in every single task.
And they often extend that to people around them too, right?
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
which can create a very difficult environment for everyone, but mostly for themselves.
So we're talking about someone who sees a 99% success rate as a moral failure because that 1% represents the flaw.
Exactly. And the risk for the perfectionist is chronic dissatisfaction and, eventually burnout. Any small human mistake is immediately magnified and seized on as objective, irrefutable proof of their fraudulence.
They must constantly doubt the quality of their own work.
Constantly. Because it never met that unattainable ideal of pure perfection. They spend so much extra time triple-checking details that no one else would ever notice, all to maintain this impossible facade.
That sounds incredibly draining. So if the perfectionist is obsessed with quality, what about the second type? The one who's focused on quantity and speed.
That would be the superhuman, or often called the superwoman or superman. This person believes they have to master multiple roles at the same time and work demonstrably harder than everyone else just to prove they aren't an imposter.
So their core belief is a compulsion. I must work harder than everyone else.
And be successful in every part of life. Career, family, hobbies, everything.
This is the leader who tries to be the visionary, the tactical manager, the HR counselor, and the primary caregiver for their family, all while, training for a marathon.
That's the perfect illustration. They take on way too many responsibilities. They constantly overextend themselves, trying to demonstrate that their worth is proportional to their output.
And the risk is
Profound emotional and physical exhaustion. They have an impossible time with work-life balance, and that's often made worse if they're in an environment with low organizational support, which forces them to pick up everyone else's slack.
the third persona seems to take the idea of innate talent and just weaponize it against themselves.
That's a really insightful way to put it. That's the natural genius. Unlike the perfectionist who obsesses over flawlessness, or the superhuman who obsesses over output, the natural genius judges their competence based on speed and the ease of finishing a task.
Their belief is success should come easily, without any visible effort.
Yes. So if they struggle or have to ask for help, or if they can't figure something out instantly, the conclusion is, I must not be smart, therefore I must be a fraud.
They feel deep shame if they have to, actually practice or struggle with a concept.
Correct. The risk here is intense self-judgment and huge frustration whenever they face a normal, predictable learning curve. If a subject takes time to master, the internal voice is screaming, I'm a natural genius, this shouldn't be this hard.
And when that expected ease doesn't happen,
The self-doubt kicks in so powerfully. It often causes them to just abandon the task entirely, rather than admit they had to work for it.
Okay, moving on to collaboration, we run into the soloist.
So soloist operates from this really restrictive core belief that asking for help is a sign of failure. They are convinced they have to prove their worth by working completely independently.
Which, in today's complex, interconnected world, sounds like a guaranteed recipe for isolation and just inefficiency.
It absolutely is. They struggle so much to accept support or to delegate. And if an achievement required any kind of collaboration, they'll diminish it internally. They feel like the achievement doesn't count.
So their biggest risk is just isolation, stalled projects, and burnout from trying to do everything themselves.
Yes. The compulsion to be self-reliant is their biggest obstacle to growth.
And finally, we have the knowledge-driven archetype, the expert. This sounds like the type who is most terrified of a pop quiz.
That is precisely right. The expert's core belief is really rigid. I must know everything to be valid. They measure their competence based on what and how much they know. They see their brain as this database that must never have a search failure.
So their behavior is to constantly seek more. More degrees, more certifications, more training.
Yes, often accumulating qualifications long past the point of being useful. They are perpetually terrified of being exposed as unknowledgeable or inexperienced.
So this is the academic who delays publishing their groundbreaking work until they've read every single supplementary paper on the topic, just so no one can possibly question their authority.
It's the hesitancy to pursue new opportunities because they haven't achieved total mastery first. And this fear is acutely triggered in public, evaluative settings like conferences or Q&A sessions.
They fear that one spontaneous question that might expose a gap in their knowledge.
And for the expert, a gap in knowledge is a gap in worthiness. So by isolating these 5 archetypes, perfectionist, superhuman, natural genius, soloist, and expert, you gain the clarity you need to counter that specific voice of the inner critic. It's a powerful first step.
That breakdown really helps us understand what IP looks like in action. But now we have to dig into why it starts. If it's not random, we have to look at the roots, the convergence of our personality, our upbringing, and the systems we operate in. So let's unpack the internal factors first.
The research on personality links is pretty compelling. Individuals who are prone to higher levels of neuroticism, meaning they're easily upset, prone to anxiety, and experience emotional distress more readily, they show a significant correlation with imposter feelings.
And perfectionism, which we just talked about as an archetype, that's a strong predictor too.
A very strong predictor. These individuals are just hypersensitive to both internal critique and external judgment.
And I imagine low self-esteem acts like a primer for this fear, doesn't it?
It does. Low self-esteem is consistently related to a higher risk of imposter feelings because the individual already believes, at a core level, that they are unworthy. When you combine that with anxiety, it creates really fertile ground for the IP pattern to take root.
So it makes you highly susceptible to self-doubt, especially when you're in a new, high-stakes environment.
Exactly. But the formative environment of childhood also plays a huge role. And the sources suggest this profound trap. 2 completely contradictory types of parental messaging can actually spark IP.
That's fascinating. What are they?
Well, this is the psychological irony of early influence. The first path is the obvious one. Constant criticism. If you're raised in an environment where you're always told you're never good enough or where failure is met with harsh judgment,
Those negative self-talk patterns just get internalized.
they become your inner voice. That inner crow screaming fraudulence later in life is just the echo of that early critical environment.
Okay, that makes sense. But what's the other, more insidious path? The path of overpraise.
The second path is universal superlative praise. Messages like, "You are the smartest kid in the world," or "You are perfect at everything you try."
That seems like a good thing.
It seems positive, but it instills these extreme and frankly impossible expectations. The child feels immense pressure to constantly maintain that unattainable, unrealistic superstar standard.
So the fear of failure in that case is catastrophic, because if you ever struggle or admit you don't know something, you feel like you're proving the praise was a lie.
And that you're fundamentally disappointing your caregivers. This pressure to maintain an impossible image, combined with parental overprotection, which can get in the way of developing realistic coping skills for setbacks, really sets the stage for IP.
The sources also had a really fascinating contrast in how different cultures approach intelligence, which seems to fundamentally alter how people internalize success.
This raises a really important question about our fundamental beliefs around competence. In many Western cultures, especially the US, there's this pervasive belief that intellectual ability is a fixed trait. You're either born brilliant or you're not.
So when a student in the US succeeds, they might feel like an imposter because they attribute that success to a fixed trait they worry they might suddenly lose.
Or that they never really had in the first place. And if they struggle, the internalized belief is that they never had that fixed trait, which just reinforces the "I'm a fraud" narrative.
So if they see success as something that should be effortless, they internalize the struggle as proof of a lack of talent.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with many East Asian cultures, where there's a greater, often explicit emphasis on gaining intelligence through demonstrable hard work, through practice, and persistent study,
So success is attributed to effort.
which is verifiable, controllable, and renewable. It's not some fragile, fixed, innate trait. And that changes the entire emotional equation of learning and achievement.
Okay, now let's pivot to a crucial systemic factor. Because while personality is internal, the source material really pushes back on the idea that IP is purely a personal psychological issue. We need to talk about the systemic factor, what's sometimes called the intruder paradox.
This is a critical distinction. It moves the conversation beyond just self-help and into organizational and social critique. When we look at marginalized or underrepresented groups, women in male-dominated fields like STEM or medicine, or people of color in corporate settings, their feelings of inadequacy are often severely exacerbated by systemic bias.
By microaggressions, by a glaring lack of role models who look or sound like them.
Exactly. In that scenario, the environment itself is acting as a confirmation of the feeling of not belonging. They are being told, implicitly or explicitly, you're not supposed to be here.
And that external pressure just reinforces the internal doubt.
It does. The sources gave a powerful example of a woman in medicine. She recounted how structural issues, like a dysfunctional administrative workflow, a lack of support, were repeatedly blamed on her personal inefficiency or her anxiety by her department chair.
Wow, that's basically gaslighting.
It is. It makes the individual feel unworthy, reinforcing the very idea of fraudulence. The focus is shifted to fixing the individual's anxiety instead of fixing the toxic, exclusionary environment that's causing it.
The most profound response to this, which the sources highlighted, is the pushback on the IP label itself.
Absolutely. Some individuals, particularly those facing active discrimination, are really clear that they can tell the difference between healthy, growth-oriented self-doubt and doubt that is manufactured and reinforced by an exclusionary system.
So they reject the label.
They reject it entirely. And they say, and this is the quote we need to hear again, it's not the imposter syndrome, it's you don't want me in the field. They correctly identify that they aren't suffering from a personal flaw. They are reacting logically to an environment that is actively hostile or exclusionary.
And the hypervigilance required to navigate those biased systems must be exhausting.
Yeah.
You're constantly monitoring your behavior to make sure you never give anyone a reason to confirm their negative bias.
It creates this immense, unnecessary pressure. If you're operating as the only person of your background in the room, there's a constant internal need to make sure nothing you do could ever be seen as proof of a stereotype. This constant striving is fueled by external pressure, not just internal anxiety.
Which makes that superhuman archetype almost an inevitable outcome.
It does. And beyond systemic bias, the sources also pointed to high-stakes, competitive, and evaluative environments as major triggers, regardless of your background. Think of academia, especially in STEM fields.
Right.
In these competitive, often underfunded settings, IP is rampant. The life cycle is just constant evaluation. Fear of tenure review, the relentless pressure for publications, unfavorable comparisons with hyperproductive peers. It just fuels the fear of exposure.
Okay, and finally, we saw a specific, often overlooked trigger related to neurodivergence, which ties directly back to that societal pressure of masking.
This is so important. For neurodivergent individuals, like those with ADHD or on the autism spectrum, the intensity of this experience is often amplified in a few ways. First, many experience rejection-sensitive dysphoria, or RSD.
Which is?
It's an extreme emotional sensitivity to perceived failure or criticism. A minor setback that a neurotypical person might brush off can feel like a catastrophic failure to someone with RSD. It powerfully fuels IP because the internal reaction is just so disproportionate to the external event.
And the mechanism of masking just creates this deep well of self-doubt.
A lifetime of masking, working 10 times harder just to hide challenges and mimic neurotypical behavior just to keep up, it creates a deep-seated feeling of being a fraud.
Because they see their external success as a performance.
An exhausting performance of a mask, not genuine competence. They worry that if their true, struggling self were ever seen, they'd be judged as not belonging, and the entire structure of their achievement would just collapse.
And this ties back to the natural genius persona, that gap between being able to come up with an idea versus the difficulty in actually executing it.
The gap between ideas and execution is a huge driver of IP in the ADHD brain. That brain can generate brilliant, complex ideas in a flash, but then struggle immensely with the linear, step-by-step, detail-oriented process required to execute it.
And that dissonance.
It leads to profound emotional damage. The person feels capable of generating the idea, but incompetent at delivering it. The success feels unearned or accidental because the follow-through was so hard, which just strengthens that internal fraud narrative.
We established that imposter syndrome is painful, it's destructive, and it's often rooted in these deep systemic issues. But here is the massive reframe we need to make.
This is the good part.
The very presence of IP is actually objective evidence that something powerful, something good is happening in your brain.
It's the ultimate counterintuitive truth. And to understand the upside, we have to look at what IP is not. IP is the mirror opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Ah, yes, the Dunning-Kruger effect, where incompetence is paired with a lack of self-awareness, making people overconfident in areas where they are totally unskilled. They're too ignorant to know what they don't know.
Exactly. The Dunning-Kruger individual suffers from a profound lack of metacognition. They can't accurately assess their own competence, they overestimate their skills, and they often underestimate the competence of genuine experts.
So what does that make the person with imposter syndrome?
The high achiever who suffers from IP possesses advanced metacognition and hyper self-awareness. As they gain expertise, their confidence doesn't inflate blindly. Instead, they become acutely aware of the complexities, the nuances, and the sheer vastness of what they do not know.
And it's that hyper-awareness, that sophisticated realization of complexity that fuels the doubt.
Precisely. It recontextualizes the challenge entirely. The feeling of being an imposter isn't a sign your knowledge is shrinking. It's a sign that your awareness of your field's complexity is rapidly expanding. The more you learn, the more you realize how much there is to learn.
So we can reframe it. The presence of imposter syndrome is objective proof that you're operating at the edge of your capability, pushing your comfort zone.
Which is where all real growth occurs. If you were truly a fraud, you wouldn't possess the high degree of self-awareness required to experience this type of doubt in the first place.
You'd just be Dunning-Krugering your way through life, dangerously oblivious to your own limitations.
The internal critic, that inner crow, is actually screaming because you are succeeding and operating at a high level. The doubt is a signal of high ambition, not inadequacy.
But is there a social or relational upside to this constant striving?
There are unexpected tangible benefits, particularly in social collaboration. Research, including work done at places like MIT, found that people who are actively dealing with imposter feelings are rated by their peers as having stronger social skills.
Like empathy and interpersonal connection.
Exactly.
Why would feeling like a fraud make you more empathetic? That seems so contradictory.
Well, the mechanism is rooted in that hyper self-awareness.
Yeah.
Because people with imposter feelings are always more conscious of how colleagues and clients perceive them. They're constantly checking their own temperature, so to speak.
Oh, I see.
They're naturally led to focus more deeply on the feelings and needs of others. They're striving to make sure they're serving their role effectively. And that drive translates into listening better and connecting more genuinely.
That's a phenomenal finding. The drive to compensate for what you perceive as inadequacy actually generates a leadership style that is inherently more careful, more collaborative, and more empathetic.
Yes. If you reframe IP as a signal of high ambition, a genuine desire to do a good job, to live up to expectations and not let people down, it helps reduce the chronic stress.
So you view the doubt not as a lack of competence, but as a sustainable side effect of striving for excellence.
And it becomes an engine for continuous improvement rather than a debilitating fear.
Okay, we've spent enough time diagnosing the problem and appreciating its weird benefits. Now it's time for the action plan. If the inner critic operates on irrational fear, we need rational, data-driven tools to fight back.
Yes.
And the first strategic shift we should adopt involves changing how we measure success entirely.
This is a fundamental mindset shift, and it applies to almost every aspect of performance.
Yeah.
It's called the gap versus the gain framework.
Okay.
Most high achievers fall into the gap trap. They measure their success against an ideal, the perfect outcome, the perfect version of the project, the unattainable destination.
Which sounds like an emotional trap. Since the ideal is always moving, always out of reach, you're perpetually judging yourself as falling short.
It is the ultimate emotional trap. You're forever on this treadmill, chasing a happiness you think will arrive once I hit X goal. And because you never arrive, you live in this perpetual state of disappointment and inadequacy.
Which just intensifies the imposter syndrome.
Right. The power move is to shift your focus to the gain. The gain involves actively measuring your progress from where you started, not from where you want to go.
So measuring backward, celebrating the growth rather than forward, lamenting the distance that's left.
Precisely. When you focus on what you've actually achieved since your starting point, you liberate yourself from feelings of failure.
Well,
You appreciate how far you've come.
Yeah.
And the positivity from acknowledging the gain fuels even more progress.
Okay, that's the mindset shift. But the inner critic runs on emotion. How do we physically arm ourselves with objective, undeniable data to combat that irrational narrative of fraudulence?
The best antidote to an irrational internal narrative is objective, undeniable data. And we collect it using the most practical tool there is, the WIN file, or the brag book.
So a central, easily accessible place, like a Google Doc or a folder.
A secure Google Doc, a dedicated folder, a physical box, whatever works. But it has to be specifically for collecting undeniable proof of your competence.
And how should it be structured to, maximize its impact?
I'd say segment it. Don't just dump documents in there. Have one section for positive qualitative feedback client testimonials, kudos from supervisors, another for objective quantitative metrics, successful project numbers, awards, budget wins.
And maybe a third for personal reflection on overcoming obstacles.
That's a great idea. And the purpose is clinical. When that inner crow gets loud and whispers that you're a fraud, your job is to immediately open that file and read the factual evidence. It is extremely difficult for the feeling of being a fraud to survive in the face of overwhelming documented proof.
That's powerful. And the value isn't just in the reading, it's in the collection itself. You have to actively hunt for the good news.
Absolutely. The act of collecting and structuring that data is a deliberate act of cognitive reframing. And there's a bonus. If you share this with a trusted colleague or a coach, not to brag, but to ask for an objective assessment, the act of verbalizing your accomplishments to them actually helps convince yourself of their validity.
Hearing yourself say it makes it more real.
It does. But the internal critic works 20/47. We need a daily habit to train the mind to look for progress. That brings us to the 3 wins daily ritual.
Okay.
This is a critical daily practice for cognitive priming. For 21 straight days, or just as a regular habit, before bed, write down 3 specific wins from the day.
And these don't have to be monumental achievements.
They shouldn't be. They can be small victories. I had a difficult conversation, but I stayed professional. I finished the first draft of that email, or I stuck to my priority list.
So even small things must count.
They have to count. The practice is designed for dopamine reinforcement. It engages your brain's reward system, which directly counters the impulse to ignore or deny success. It literally trains your mind to actively look for progress and positive outcomes throughout the day.
It rewires your focus away from failure and toward effort and gain.
And there's that crucial proactivity loop to set up the next day for success.
Right?
After recording today's wins, you write down 3 intended wins for tomorrow. It's an intentional act of agency. It lets you start the next day with purpose, not just reacting passively to anxiety.
Okay, finally, let's talk about changing the actual language we use internally. Cognitive restructuring.
Cognitive restructuring is the process of identifying and modifying those negative, irrational thought patterns, which we call cognitive distortions. IP relies heavily on them.
Like catastrophizing, exaggerating the negative parts of a single mistake.
Or overgeneralization, viewing one negative event as an endless, predictable pattern. The goal isn't to stop the thought from arriving, but to challenge its authority.
You challenge the assumption.
Precisely. And you replace the fixed, absolute language with growth-oriented incremental language. So you move from a fixed mindset to an incremental theory.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Instead of the bad, I am unqualified, or I don't know how to solve this, I'm an idiot, use the reframed. I haven't learned the specific solution yet, but I have the foundational skills and capacity to research and figure it out.
That word, yet, is doing a lot of work there.
It's the key. It acknowledges the current limitation, but asserts competence and agency for the future. It's the critical difference between internalizing I am a failure and acknowledging I experienced a setback.
You acknowledge the feeling, yes, I feel stressed, but you deny its authority over objective reality.
That is the mental muscle you build. Even someone like Lady Gaga uses this technique. She said her mantra is, I just have to pick myself up and tell myself that I'm a superstar every morning so that I can get through this day.
That's a deliberate act of challenging the internal narrative.
Forcing the brain to engage with a different reality.
Up until now, we focused on the individual tools for managing imposter syndrome. But IP doesn't exist in a vacuum. It impacts teams, organizations, and careers.
Right.
So effective leadership requires proactively mitigating IP in others, especially those facing systemic pressures.
And the first step in that mitigation is modeling imperfection, but doing so strategically. We have to talk about the critical rule of vulnerability in leadership, the scar versus wound protocol.
This is so vital for authentic leadership. We know leaders need to be vulnerable to build trust, but unfiltered vulnerability can backfire badly.
That's right. Sharing a raw wound, a current unprocessed struggle or anxiety, can be highly damaging. When a leader overshares a raw wound, it transfers an emotional burden to the team,
The team starts managing the leader's stability instead of focusing on their own work.
which erodes trust and makes the team feel profoundly uncertain. They don't feel inspired. They feel responsible for the leader's emotional state.
So strategic vulnerability involves sharing the scar, the healed struggle that carries a lesson.
Precisely. A scar is a past challenge that is healed and provided a clear, actionable lesson. Sharing from the scar builds genuine connection and gives the team a roadmap.
So a leader might say, I struggled with intense self-doubt when I first took on this role, and here is how I learned to navigate it.
By creating my win file and finding an external mentor.
Right.
Yes. This shows that struggle is navigable and models the process of dealing with uncertainty with competence.
The sources had 3 filtering questions a leader should ask before sharing. That's a good tactical checklist.
Yes. When you're tempted to share something vulnerable, you pause and ask yourself, 1, is this a scar or a wound? 2, does this act of sharing serve my team's development, or is it mainly to relieve my own stress?
And 3,
3, can I share a clear lesson or roadmap, not just the raw struggle? If you can't answer all 3 clearly, you're probably engaging in self-serving oversharing.
the team needs the guide, not the latest emotional crisis.
Exactly.
Okay, beyond personal modeling, what active steps can managers take? What's the managerial protocol to combat IP in their teams, especially for new hires?
Managers need to adopt what we call intrusive leadership. Now, this doesn't mean micromanagement. It means taking intentional, proactive actions to ensure employees feel an explicit sense of belonging, directly challenging that IP narrative.
So intrusive leadership means preemptive support.
It does. The first step is active affirmation. When you're onboarding new talent, the supervisor has to preemptively affirm their value with specific statements.
Like, you belong here.
Or, even better, we specifically hire you because your unique background in X is exactly what our team was lacking. These phrases speak directly to the self-doubt that whispers, I don't belong.
What's next?
The manager should also use public validation. This means when you're introducing team members, the manager should be the one to highlight specific, objective accomplishments. This removes the emotional burden from the employee of having to self-affirm.
Which is torture for someone feeling like a fraud.
Exactly. The manager acts as the objective validator. And finally, you have to be willing to have a direct conversation. This is crucial for stopping the cycle of silence.
So if a manager notices the signs, an employee is consistently silent, overworking, they need to schedule a time to talk about it specifically.
Yes, from a place of observation and care. I notice you are consistently submitting 120% effort, which is brilliant, but I worry about your sustainability. Can we talk about the pressure you feel?
And the manager has to be willing to lean in, even if they're afraid of misdiagnosing the issue.
Being a trusted source, even if you just open the door for them to talk about their pressure points, is so much better than letting them suffer in silence, believing they're the only one who feels this way.
We've taken a comprehensive deep dive today, and the synthesis seems clear. Imposter syndrome isn't a sign that you're deficient. It's not a flaw that needs to be fixed in the traditional sense.
It is instead a sophisticated cognitive signal. It's objective proof that you are ambitious, that you hold yourself to high standards, and that you're actively growing.
It means you're pushing the boundaries of your competence.
What's fascinating here is that the goal is not, and really shouldn't be, to eliminate doubt entirely. Healthy self-doubt, the core experience of IP, is actually necessary for growth, for self-correction, and for that empathy we discussed.
If you stopped feeling that doubt completely, you would risk becoming dangerously overconfident.
And you'd lose the critical self-awareness that drives genuine excellence.
So the goal then is to manage the voice, that inner crow, not eliminate it. We use the rational tools we talked about, the win file, the gap versus the gain shift, the cognitive reframing, to make sure our actions are dictated by the overwhelming tangible evidence of our success.
Not by the irrational, corrosive voice of our feelings.
Remember that you now know that high achievers often struggle the most with internalizing success.
And if the confidence of those who seem certain is maybe a reflection of their lack of self-awareness, the Dunning-Kruger effect, then your self-doubt is a reflection of your sophistication and your expanding mastery.
That hesitation you feel, that gnawing worry that you don't know enough to start, that intense feeling that you are operating right at the edge of your knowledge. That hesitation is your most reliable confirmation that you are actually ready.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought. You now possess the knowledge and the tools. What single monumental task have you been avoiding? What new project, what promotion, what creative endeavor, just because that inner critic told you that you didn't know enough to begin?
That hesitation is your signal.
It is.
The final unspoken rule of these deep dives is that you cannot simply walk away from a new truth without acknowledging the journey you just took. If this deep dive gave you even one tool to outsmart that critical voice, we invite you to acknowledge that progress.
Leave a comment. Detail which of the 5 personas you recognized in yourself. Did you see the perfectionist, the expert, or the natural genius? Sharing that scar-built connection and resilience for everyone else reading.
Commit to starting your daily win file today by giving this video a like. Every like is a small dopamine hit reinforcing the idea that you are on the right track.
And if you never want to miss another lesson in the unspoken curriculum of life, make sure you ring the bell and subscribe.
We are here every week, providing the raw material you need for persistent learning. Until next time.